Welcome back to my channel. My name is Evelyn.
My name is Monty.
Yes, I have another very special guest here on my channel today, and we're here to talk about his Dark Materials. For those of you who are unaware, this is my father. We normally sit together. Well, we don't normally sit together. Normally, when we're doing videos together, it's for our second channel, Two-Headed Writer, where we talk about our writing together, and I will put a link to that in the description below. But today, we're here on my channel because we're talking about a book series that I love, that he introduced me to, and the adaptations of it, and like, what's up with that? Fair warning, there will be spoilers for the book series, the movie, and the TV series probably as we have this discussion. So if you haven't read these books, first of all, go read them. They're amazing. Second of all, you might want to click away from this video, but thank you for watching anyway. For some context, I believe you first read these books out loud to me, and I had to be around 6.
Yes, we would read. We read to you every night of your life until you graduated high school and left home. Often we would read things that you probably weren't quite old enough for, but you were very good at listening and good at understanding the stories. When you were very, very young, we would read you novels and then have this discussion. Does she really understand what we're reading to her? I don't know. Let's ask her some questions. We'd ask you some questions and you would answer them always. Just you were tuned in and you were thinking about it and you knew what was going on. Anyway, so 6 probably was not too young for you to read these books too.
Yeah, but it might be
too young for a lot of people.
Yeah, there are some interesting content and themes. A lot of like, hey, what's up with religion? That's a scam. So just in case you haven't read it, but you did.
You're stubborn enough to be watching anyway.
The His Dark Materials series by Phillip Pullman. The first book is called The Golden Compass, or if you are British, it's called The Northern Lights. Here he has a copy of it. Yes. The main character is this like 12, 13-year-old girl named Lyra, and she lives in a world where every human has a demon that's part of their soul, and they take the form of an animal. And when you're a child, your demon can transform into different animals, but as you go through puberty, your demon settles into one animal form that people say tells you about who you are as a person. So Lyra and her demon Pantalemon have grown up in Jordan College at Oxford because she's been told that her parents died and her uncle took her there. And she's been raised by the scholars at Jordan, and she's kind of a wild human.
Runs wild.
She runs wild
Plays
through
with
Oxford,
Egyptian kids.
plays with Egyptian children, avoids lessons unless they're things that she's interested about, like dust.
She's only interested in dust because she's not supposed to know about it.
Yes. So our story opens when her uncle, Lord Asriel, comes to Oxford, and she ends up spying on him and finding out about dust. He travels to the north. That's his thing. He's an explorer, and he's been researching dust, and she is very obsessed with going with him, but he refuses to take her.
Which, by the way, we're not talking about house dust.
We're talking about special magical particles.
Well,
they're not magical.
Elemental particles. This is the physics of this world.
Yeah. Lyra does not go with her uncle, but she does end up going with this woman named Mrs. Coulter, who takes her to be her assistant and promises that she's going to take Lyra to the north. At the same time, children have been disappearing from throughout England, and there were rumors of a group called the Gobblers who have been snatching them up. Lyra discovers that Mrs. Coulter is actually the head of the Gobblers, or the General Oblation Board, and she runs away and ends up joining a bunch of Egyptians who are headed to the north to rescue their children. And then it just gets weirder and more complicated and more wonderful from there. Like I said, there are witches, there are giant talking bears, there's travel between worlds. It's really cool.
Mostly the travel between worlds happens in the second two
Yeah,
books.
happens in the second 2 books.
So this one is sort of leading up to to learning that there are other worlds and the first opening of a doorway.
Yes. Yeah, and these books, I fell in love with them. I was very obsessed with these characters in this world. I think part of it is it was the first time I'd read a portal fantasy, my introduction to the concept. Well, you didn't really read Narnia to me, did you? Because Narnia...
We didn't do Narnia.
Yeah, Narnia is kind of the opposite of these books.
Yeah.
But...
Wizard of Oz, though.
Wizard of Oz, yes. I guess that would have been... But this was very explicitly discussing travel between worlds in a way where it was purposeful and the main point of the story.
And then from that time on, all of your creative play was based around that idea.
Yes.
And you would do complicated plots that involved all the characters from all the books you ever read and opening windows like they do in The Subtle Knife, opening windows into those other worlds. And then you were always wanting me to play that with you, so we would go through those windows into other worlds with all the characters from one book going into another book. And you loved it. Like, your favorite thing in the world was to have characters meet. Like, that moment where the characters from this story met the characters from that story, and how would they interact and all of that.
Yeah.
And we'd play that out. And
I still love that. Even
that was for years. That was how you played. That was just how you played.
My favorite parts of ensemble cast books, especially ones where the cast does not get together until like the last book or near the end. Just whenever there's like a group of characters and I know all of them and I'm waiting for them to meet each other, when they finally meet, I get very excited about it. And that's even come through in a lot of my own writing as well. Our book together is a portal fantasy, and
Yes.
a significant number of the projects that I have started and not completed on my own are also portal fantasies. Surprisingly, the one that I'm working on right now is not. But it falls into a different category of fantasy that I enjoy. We just finished watching the BBC HBO collab TV adaptation of these books that released this year. He asked me, like, how do you remember so much of this plot? I was like, it is so deeply ingrained within me that I don't think it's, like, part of who I am as a person.
Well, and I think you've reread these books a number of times.
I honestly don't think I've reread them that many times compared to other books.
Well, compared to how many times I've reread them. The last time I read them was when I read them to you. So, it's a
I
while
have
back.
reread the entire series at least once, and then I reread The Golden Compass last December as well. Yeah, so I was 6 years old when we first read these, or thereabouts. Not any older than that, because I saw the movie when it came out, and that was in 2007, and I was 6 years old.
Okay.
So that's how I know that I was that young.
Oh, and even as a 6-year-old, you got so... Can I swear on this?
Yeah, you can.
You got so pissed off at that movie.
Yeah.
You were just like, this is not how the book goes. And you were so mad.
I was
So mad, so hurt, and just, upset.
I was
Made you cry.
betrayed. Critics and audiences alike were not pleased with this movie, and I was the most displeased.
They panned it. Panned it. They
Yeah.
panned it. You might want to edit that out.
The movie covered most of the first book, but left out the ending. So Lyra has gone to Bolvanger, which is where the children are being kept. The General Oblation Board has been cutting children away from their demons in an attempt to save them from sin, which they believe dust is a physical manifestation of the original sin.
Right, and cutting children away from their demons is not a pleasant thing.
No. They need them. They're part of their souls. She has gone to rescue her friend Roger, and she and Roger are in this balloon with this man named Lee Scoresby, and that is where the movie ends. I had to pee, like, really bad. And so we'd gotten up to go pee, me and my mother, come back, movie is over. I'm convinced that I took so long, for a second, I'm convinced that I took so long to pee that I missed the last whole big chunk of the book. And so I immediately burst into tears. And then he sat there and watched the end, and he's like, no, they just didn't do the end. Which, there were two entire episodes of the TV series
Beyond that point.
And
granted, they included material from the second book, and they are also kind of slow at that point.
Yeah.
I felt like the episodes in the TV series slowed down as we went, and there were moments where I was like, okay, let's move forward now. Yes. But still, 2 whole episodes.
But yeah.
These are hour-long episodes.
I haven't watched it in a while, but I just remember it was very exposition heavy, because this came out right around the time where people were looking for a replacement for Lord of the Rings, because those movies had just ended. Mm-hmm. And so they attempted to do this because, it's a whole huge big world. But because of the very anti-religious themes in the books, a bunch of people kicked up a fuss about it, and so they attempted to kind of dull that down and play up like, ooh, fancy magical world, and it just ended up falling flat. So there was a lot riding on this TV show for me. It was like a chance for redemption, and it was a test to my theory that long-form fantasy series are gonna be better if you make them into TV shows and not movies.
Good theory.
So, yes. Now we can talk about the TV show.
What do you want to say?
Okay.
What are your issues?
I actually surprisingly had very few issues. There were several moments where I was like, oh, this is different from the book, but I could see how it was a change that was actually helpful in terms of making the story make more sense or elaborating on character development that isn't necessarily as fully fleshed out in the books,
right.
etc.
So maybe the biggest one is the man with the snake.
Yes, and actually, reading more into it, I do believe that he might actually show up in the second and third books as an antagonist, but he wasn't in the first one, and that's what threw me.
Right.
There's this character, right. Lord Boreal, who I do actually think...
That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's in the second and third books, but he just randomly shows up and becomes an antagonist, and they took him and they connected him with kind of an unexplained plot point from the beginning of The Subtle Knife. So I was not expecting to see Will in the first season of this TV show. He shows up in The Subtle Knife, and he's Lyra's companion as she journeys through these different worlds. He's introduced throughout a few chapters at the beginning of The Subtle Knife before you get to Lyra. And I remember, that was weird.
That seemed weird to you
that
when we
seemed
read
weird
it.
to me when we read it.
Yeah.
It was very small. I was like, where is Lyra?
Where's
Because
Lyra?
I loved her so much. I wanted to be Lyra. And so Will was there. I'm like, who is this random cat-loving boy? In The Subtle Knife, you're introduced to Will when he is taking his mother to stay with his piano teacher, actually, in the book. He takes her because he believes that there are men who are staking out their house. and they're looking in particular for this black case that has letters from his father, who disappeared several years prior on an expedition in Alaska. Those men do show up, and they do break into Will's house, and he does end up accidentally kind of killing one of them, but it's not really his fault, but he definitely thinks that it is, and so he runs away, and that's how he ends up meeting Lyra. This is all shown in the first season of His Dark Materials, the TV show, and it's connected back to Lord Boreal, and you see that he's actually the one who has hired these men and sent them, and you see why he wants to find out more about Will's father, which is something that doesn't really get explained very much in The Subtle Knife. So, although I was not expecting to see that storyline play out, I was actually kind of pleased by the way that it did, because it did kind of clear up one of the big plot holes in the book.
Right. And I think it prepares you well for the second season.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll know who Will is. I like the way it ended with the very end of the last episode. You can fast forward real quick if you don't want to hear this, but Lyra and Will both step through the portal at the same time, and then that's it. We don't get to see where they end up, but we know they're both starting a brand new adventure at that point.
And we do know that they are destined to meet. It's been established.
That was a little bit awkward in the series.
It was?
Because we know they're destined to meet. Why? Because the narrator told us so, and the narrator only showed up for those few seconds to tell us that. Like, there's no narrator throughout the whole series. Then in episode, 6 or so, suddenly there's a narrator telling us, this guy Will that you see on the screen right now, he's going to be important. He and Lyra will meet later on.
I thought it was weird that it would be a narrator. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be someone we'd already seen, like, spouting lines of prophecy.
I kept thinking they
would cut. But they didn't do a cut like that.
Yeah, cut to a scene where we find out who's talking and they're telling somebody else about it. That's what I expected too. And then we didn't get that.
I think
it's a little bit awkward.
We heard Lyra's prophecy in a similar manner, and they did do a cut like that. So it was strange that they didn't when it came to Will.
Yeah. Sorry, series, you're not perfect. But the series was good.
Yeah.
We enjoyed it.
We did really enjoy it. They changed how her parentage was revealed. So in the books, once she goes and meets up with Egyptians, they're like, hey, Lord Asriel is your father and Mrs. Coulter is your mother. You need to know this now that you're caught up in this. But in the series, they actually reveal that Lord Asriel is her father before they reveal that Mrs. Coulter is her mother, because Mrs. Coulter accidentally, blurts it out. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was interesting. Yeah,
because Mrs. Coulter, she's powerful and mysterious, and it sort of served to show Lyra that she wasn't all powerful. Like, she has flaws. Mm-hmm. She has weaknesses.
And it is
because she lost control of herself and said something she didn't mean to say.
Yes, and it's paired with a moment that is in the books where Mrs. Coulter has her demon grab Lyra's demon
Pandalimon.
Well, Pantalimon.
Pantalimon.
Is how they were saying it.
Pantalimon.
Yeah, that was the only word that they really... Pantalimon and then Yorick were the only names that they pronounced differently than us. Which I was like, good job us. We got most of the words right.
I know. My most embarrassing mispronounced name, but this is just an aside.
Yeah.
But in Harry Potter, before you were even born, your mom and I read those books to each other, and we were saying Hermione.
Which, that's a name. That's not even a made-up thing. It's a...
I know. Well, I'd never heard the name before. We're like, how do you say that? I don't know. Hermione. This book, The Golden Compass, is full of names and place names and people names, and they all have weird pronunciations.
It's interesting because Lyra does live in an alternate version of our world. Usually the names have a our
Analog.
world equivalent. And so sometimes it takes a minute for you to figure out, like, what are they talking about in comparison to, like, what's actually real and what I know. They call God the authority.
Which I wanted to bring that up anyway.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
So you were talking about how in the movie they downplay the religious aspect. I was curious how the series compares. When they talk about the authority, they're talking about God. But it's very subtle because, the authority is a word that could mean lots of things. And they never defined it. They never sort of had a conversation where they're tell the viewer what they mean by that word. They just use it occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was privy to that. I was like, oh, they're talking about God. I'm not sure how clear they made it, or how, even like the whole, what's the government called?
The magisterium.
Yeah, the magisterium.
Which is like the Catholic Church on steroids.
Right. So it's a
Theological.
It's a theocracy. It's a religious form of government.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how clear that was in the series.
I think it does become more clear over time. Especially, there's the whole scholastic sanctuary debate that happens a lot, which is not something that was in the original books, but it is something that is talked about in the Book of Dust. Kind of like separation of church and state, but it's separation of church and academics.
Right.
If you haven't gotten it yet, by the end, there is that conversation that Lord Asriel has with Lyra about their version of Adam and Eve. When he's talking about the story, instead of whatever happens for consequences in our version, I'm not
kicked
that
out of the
familiar.
Garden of Eden.
It's said that when Eve eats the apple in their world, her demon settles, and that's why demon settle is because of sin. When your demon settles, that means it is no longer able to change its shape as it was able to when you were a child, and that is a signifier of adulthood. When he's telling that story, it's familiar enough that when he says the authority, you can tell that he's saying it in place of God. So if you haven't caught on, which I feel like you would have.
Right, that would be the moment where you do catch on.
Yes.
Yes.
Although that is in the very last episode, and that's the moment where I do believe it's most explicit. They show you a lot more of the magisterium. In general, they show you a lot more of the adults in this. For most of the books, the focus is on Lyra. She is the main character, but the TV series actually took the time to give us a little more fleshed out versions of some of the adult characters, including some who, in the books, once they're gone, like the Master of Jordan College.
Good point.
So I actually, I appreciated that because as much as I, as a child, did love that Lyra was like able to hold her own amongst these adults, and she was cleverer than some of them, and that it did focus so much on her part. Now I am interested in like, well, what's motivating these adult characters, and I feel like that's definitely clearer, but at the same time, I haven't read the second two books in a while, so if I read them now, it also might be clearer to me now.
Probably. These books are so layered and so subtle and sophisticated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a 6-year-old, there was plenty for you to hang on to, plenty for you to care about. But every time you reread them, as you go through life, every time you reread them, there's more to understand.
In particular, I feel like I'm understanding Mrs. Coulter a lot better, because when I was 6 years old, she was just the villain, right?
Yeah.
But now I'm a female adult human in a world that is male dominated, and I'm like, oh, I get it. So
she's pulled between her ambitions and wanting to be a mother.
Yes. And specifically, becoming a mother is what set her back in her goals. She was married and she cheated on her husband, and that resulted in Lyra. And when people found out, it was a very big scandal, and Lyra was taken away from her. She says even that she would not have been a good mother at that point in time, because I think her life was destroyed by the events that happened, which you don't really get her point of view even in the Book of Dust. When they go back and kind of explore that more, you don't really get to see her. One of the Magisterium people even says to her, like, what happened to you? You were, like, so ambitious. Like, what did he do to you? Talking about Lord Asriel. She wants to be a mother, but she's also kind of desperate to regain her footing. And so, although she might not necessarily always agree with the Magisterium, they're her best chance to, like, regain that sort of power. And she, because she's a woman, gets doubly shamed for her mistakes over, like, say, what a man would. And so her obsession with ridding children of sin and regret, like, comes from her, like, own personal experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool, because, so, like, from my experience with these books so far, even though I don't like her as a person, I think she's a much more interesting character in this series.
More understandable.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, she will never be a good mother at any point in her life. No. She's not mother material at all.
No, she is.
When you said, at this point she wouldn't be a good mother, I'm like, at any point?
Well, she admits to Lyra that when Lyra was born and after her husband was killed, she wouldn't have been a good mother, and that's why she gave her up. Mm-hmm. She thinks right now that she can
thinks, I could be a good mother now.
She's wrong.
So I wanted to talk about demons.
Yes.
Because this is one of the things that made me just fall in love with these books to begin with. Because from page 1, demons are a thing. And you start reading it and you're not quite sure what he's talking about. It's like, demons? You mean like, from hell? No. Just Philip Pullman does such a great job of using that concept to paint a picture of a world that is similar to ours, where we can relate to the people because they're humans, they're people. But they live a different kind of life from us.
Yeah, fundamentally different.
Fundamentally different, because everything that goes along with it, all the little rules about how demons work, all the little consequences for how you live, how people relate to each other. When you meet someone, your demons also meet each other. A person's demon is the opposite gender of the person. I would be really interested to meet a gender neutral person in this world.
There is a brief instance in the first book where Lyra describes a man whose demon is also male.
Ooh, cool.
But that's not really brought up ever again, and so I don't know what that means about him. I don't know if he's supposed to be gay or trans or what.
And that's what's cool about it. It doesn't have to be an analog. You could find an analog for it in our world, but there doesn't have to be. I mean, what does it mean when a person's demon is their same gender? Well, that's not even a question we can ask in this world, which is what I'm talking about. What makes this so cool, right? Because, and then he doesn't have to answer that. It's just a thing. Like, there's so many things in the world that are, we think there's patterns, and then there's always something to buck that pattern.
Yes.
And how do you deal with it? Well, this world is rich enough where you have that aspect to it. You could ask endless questions about how demons work. And the characters they know a little bit. They don't know everything. They're trying to study it, right? There's a whole science behind it. It has to do with dust. Why do demons change form when you're a child and then stop changing form at some point? They think that has something to do with dust. And, it's something that they're studying. They do this terrible thing, which is chopping the demon away from a child. It's like taking their soul away, and then that child is left sort of empty and despondent and can't really function. But they're doing that in order to study dust. So, I mean, there's this question of how to ethically study a physical phenomenon that would affect people. And they're not being ethical about it at all. But they do have their reasons, not just because they hate kids, it's because they're trying to understand how it works, and then trying to put that knowledge to work, to make the world a better place. So it's complicated, and like all these, like the entire story comes out of that that one thing is that people have demons and this is how it works.
One thing that I really appreciate is that although he does take a kind of science versus religion stance, and it does in the first book really to Lyra become Mrs. Coulter versus Lord Asriel, her mother versus her father, at the end, Lord Asriel betrays her just as much as Mrs. Coulter has.
Even more so.
Yes. And so it becomes clear that neither science nor religion is morally free, right? Each of them can be morally good or morally bad, depending on who's doing it and how.
Very well put. Yeah. Good.
And
good
that's
job.
very powerfully shown by, spoiler alert, the death of Roger. Which is something that was not in the movie, and so watching it on screen, although it was different than how it's portrayed in the books, that was another major change. In the books, he doesn't have a machine, he just pulls Roger and his demon apart, like, physically until it snaps.
Ouch.
And I was thinking I was going to have to watch that, and that would have been a lot worse, so I'm a little glad that they changed the circumstances.
It visually makes it very clear what's happening.
Yes.
Because we've seen this machine before, and this is a smaller version of it. But as soon as we see that machine, we know what he's up to. And when he uses it, we know what's happening. So, I mean, they've established this visual language, and they're reusing it. I think that's...
Yeah, that was definitely
helpful.
a good change. But I know, like, as soon as that episode started, I knew what was going to happen, and I hadn't had to see it before, and I was like, oh boy, like, this is gonna really hurt.
You left the room. Evelyn's always, since she was a child, if something hard to take is coming up on the TV screen, she leaves the room.
Yeah, and they made it even worse because they had so many sweet moments with Roger and Lyra leading up to it.
I know, they were lingering on their relationship and
yes.
just go, we knew what was coming. If we didn't know what was coming, it would have been
shocking.
Quite a blow.
It would have been
quite a blow.
Devastating.
Well, that was another thing about demons is you have to stay close to your demon. If your demon's too far away from you, it starts to hurt.
It starts to hurt, and
then there's
you feel what they feel.
There are witches who are different from humans, and witches have demons that can go far away from them. And then there's Mrs. Coulter, for some reason, her demon can go far away from her, and so that's weird, and you're like, why does hers work that way? And so there's all this stuff about demons. And then, when they go into other worlds, you find out that in our world, people have a soul. In Lyra's world, people have a demon. In every world, there's an analog, but it's different every time. You get it real quick. You're like, oh, everybody has a demon, okay. And then there's so much layering to it, so much detail to it.
Yes.
I just feel like Philip Pullman, this is just the brilliance of these books, the brilliance of the way that he creates a world that's so different, yet so the same, and so rich, and it's all wrapped up in this one concept. It's just...
And
I wish I could write something like that.
I mean, it
just
makes more sense. Like, you see these demons, and they're very obviously like a physical manifestation of your soul, you as a human. And so, being in a world where that exists, it makes sense that religion would be a more pervasive thing, because there is like something that you can point at and be like, that's like, right? I feel like, to me...
Right, because when you die, and here's another thing about demons, so this is the primer on demons. When you die, your demon just disappears.
Yeah.
And they were talking about that, I think, in the first episode. Roger's like, how come when we die, our demons just disappear, but our bodies leave behind these nasty bones, right? And so that's a mysterious thing, and they don't have a way of explaining it scientifically. So religion steps in to fill that void.
Yeah, and so just from that one change, that then sets up for the magisterium logically to be a thing, and then that sets up like, oh, they're not as scientifically advanced in the same ways that we are, and then the culture is slightly different because of that. Because you don't go into our world right away in the series, you get used to how their world looks, and so when it went to like modern day our Oxford, it was like, whoa.
It was quite a contrast.
Yeah.
So I love your point that all of that, even the fact that their technology isn't quite as advanced as us because they have more religion, and it all comes down to the demon.
Demon existing.
Right? That one idea, he just built everything off
Yes.
of that.
And this series did
amazing.
demons, I think, a lot better, because at the very beginning they have some text on the screen. They're like, this world, they've got demons, go for it. Like, they tell us right off the bat, and
Yeah, they
they
did
don't
explain it.
spend time in the story explaining it, which is how he does it.
Right, in the book, you're thrown in as a reader. You're
Yeah.
just thrown in, you have to
He's
kind of
very good at that.
figure that stuff out as you go.
He's very good at giving you enough context that you can very quickly figure out, like, what the differences are and what the unfamiliar words are, which, like, all good world building does that, and he does it really well. The last thing I wanted to mention, it took me a second to notice, but once I noticed, I was like, oh, damn, I appreciate this. Which was that they were very casually diverse with their casting. Yeah, the Egyptians especially were very racially diverse, different body types. There was a man whose arms were... His forearm was shorter, and he was just there. He was, in fact, one of their leaders, and it wasn't really ever...
It was never mentioned, it was
yeah.
never part of the plot. It's that's how he was.
Just casually, there. I don't think this would have happened if they had kept doing the movies. The movies were very white. Will definitely would not have been a biracial, dark-skinned human.
Right.
Which I thought was really cool, because I remember when I noticed that, I was like, oh, the master of Jordan College is black, and then, the Costa children are some sort of ambiguously ethnic mix of human. When I noticed that people were more diverse, I was like, oh, that would be cool. What if next season, because they hadn't shown us Will yet, I was like, what if next season they cast, like, a not white kid to play Will? They could totally do that. And then they did it! They beat me to it, and I was so proud.
I beat you too.
Yeah. They did a really good job of casting, like, Lyra and her parents. Like, they look like they are related to me, like, way more than the movie cast did.
Yeah, I really liked Lyra in the series. I didn't take me long at all to believe that was Lyra.
Yeah,
like, okay,
no.
that's Lyra.
Daphne Keane is great in this.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Love her. Lin-Manuel Miranda did better than I expected. His accent was iffy at times, but great. Alright, we literally have 1 minute left. Thank you for sitting with us for such a long time, listening to us geek out about this book that we love and this series that we're just so excited it was good. So if you liked this video and you want to see more from my channel, please remember to click that subscribe button and ring that bell icon to be notified whenever I post a new video. If you want to hear more about movie adaptations, TV adaptations, it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I would love to talk about it more, so leave a comment down below. What is your favorite movie adaptation? And maybe I have thoughts. Most definitely I have thoughts. Thank you,
lots.
Father, for joining me today.
Of course.
And with that being said, my name is Evelyn. I make new videos every magical Monday, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.